Well, welcome back, everyone, to the virtual collaboration experience. We're in the middle of this all-day event powered by Wolf Vision. 3 panel discussions every hour, topped off with a virtual happy hour later this afternoon. I hope you can all join. Thanks for joining this discussion topic, Managing Collaboration Technology in a Software-Defined World. I'm Rob Moss, Regional Sales Manager for the Pacific Northwest. Joining me today in this discussion is Mark Jones of South College, Michael Dannenberg of Vantage Consulting, and Frank Pellkofer and founder and president of Utelligy. These gentlemen represent the 3 critical components for success in our space: design consulting, product manufacturing, and the end user. So let's get to it. The thing that strikes me when I'm thinking about this topic, or anything that surrounds convergence or the convergence of IT and AV, is that we've been talking about this. I was trying to think of the date, but I think I first heard about this at an Infocom. It was a big deal like in 2000, if I'm not mistaken, if you can believe that or not. So we've been on this road to software and the network being at the center of AV for an awful long time, right? But it seems like in this moment of time right now, where we are, that something unique has happened, right? That something has either forced us or made us more aware of the importance of the network and of software moving forward. How could we not think that when a software product has become the vehicle in the last 4 months for people communicating, right? Its ability to scale and its ability to deploy is second to none, those types of things. So that's just one of the little things and reasons why software is important and becoming such a mainstay. But I'm going to give this first question out to Frank. Frank, what is the software-defined technology in your estimation? How does it compare with hardware-bound solutions?
Well, I mean, you mentioned scalability, the ability, software-defined solutions very easily, live within the realm of Moore's law without having to throw the hardware framework around that out with the bathwater. Long-term examples would be like VDI technologies, virtual desktops, right? I have a screen, I have a keyboard, but all of my processing power is done back at the data center and it's delivered to me. Same with software-defined networking. I can, when new features and capabilities are made available, my hardware goes a lot farther because I don't have to throw a whole piece of hardware out to take advantage of a new, network routing feature or switching feature. Same thing with audio visual, and we've been talking about this for a long time. But if the core of the technology that you're deploying, the solution that you seek is premised on software, your hardware investment, however that comes as a service or a CapEx expense, theoretically should last a lot longer.
Sure. So, Michael, what are some examples of specific software-defined applications? Obviously, there's the computer, but what have we become accustomed to? What do we just recognize?
Well, I think front-end user instructional software, making sure that there's a good common user interface. It's very easy for somebody to work with, and it's easy to deploy. Classroom management software, audio-visual bridging, as Frank mentioned, being able to route and cascade where you couldn't really easily do that in an analog world, or even recently just the digital world. This allows you to really cascade onto it. Web collaboration software, all these different things, the tools that allow you to now manage all of these deployments as well. You don't necessarily have to deploy somebody out into the field. Now you can go in there and through software, govern and manage those different assets remotely over the network. And of course, that means that there's a lot of things that need to be looked at on the back end side with data privacy and a network security, and looking at that to make sure that all those different tools that you're deploying are really looked at carefully by the IT department, and because they're the ones who are going to take ownership of this and compartmentalize all of those different devices and assets on the network.
Right. So it sounds to me that, like, we're talking about flexibility a lot. A lot of the words we're using surround flexibility, ease of deployment, ease of monitoring. What about the nuts and bolts of using software over hardware? As far as feature sets or upgradability, what are we finding in that regard? Do you have any ideas on that, Mark?
Yeah, quite a bit. Especially in the classrooms, as we've moved our students' information system and moved a lot of the collaboration pieces and all of that, the software now becomes going into a single portal, basically, where the students log in, and they want to have access to everything, and it doesn't matter whether they're in the classroom or wherever they are at. So we literally had to take it and make it not so complex, and take out the pieces and almost blend old school and new school together. So we make it easy with almost like on the Wolf Fusion side, add the AI functionality piece to it to be able to manage that back end side that the students don't even see. And so the software pieces, whether it's from them taking their tests with ExamView, whether it's a lockdown browser, all of this has to function together on their single laptop.
Right. So what are some of the gotchas, if you will? What do we have to be careful about, and what are we seeing as issues that we're stumbling over as we deploy software and as we move away from that hardware model?
I would love to jump in here really quick and
Sure.
talk about that. One of the biggest challenges that I've seen is anytime you're deploying hardware into a new environment and it hasn't been vetted by the IT department, and you're working with a group, I'm seeing the need for more expanded knowledge on an integration side from those contractors to understand and be able to communicate and have and collaborate with the IT departments to make sure that the devices that they're putting on the network and setting up for them, that they're speaking the same language. Because what ends up happening is either the manufacturer has to step in, a design consultant has to step back in and get involved in it. So I think it's really a lessons learned that the integration side, they really need to become more versed in this climate. And the IT departments, of course, need to be a little bit more flexible as well, and looking at how to take some of these components that are brought into possible betterment or expansion capabilities, such as streaming, multiplexing and matrixing solutions and classroom governance software, and making sure that they are comfortable with it and understand how to deploy things on their network, like wireless collaboration, and then how does that fit into their data privacy and security and models.
Right. So I'm hearing you say it's not just about termination, it's not just about installation. There's a lot more that goes into having to have a discussion about the network and understanding the nuance of that. What are you finding, Frank? Is that what you're finding?
Yeah, Michael's got that spot on, and in fact, you're not going to do any sort of meaningful deployment where there's value in today's climate without being able to have a credible InfoSec review with your customer's InfoSec team, a credible data center conversation with the data center team, a credible, core router to edge switch, edge port conversation, and those are typically 3 at least individuals in a small enterprise, and 3 teams on the larger enterprises. And if like us in AV, we know really quickly and instinctively if someone's pulling your leg or kind of bluff you a little bit about audio and the physics of audio. It's just we can smell that in a minute or two. Well, these IT departments, they have the same thing. And as soon as your credibility is undermined by your own lack of understanding, your conversation is over, as far as my experience has been and what I've seen.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I've heard out there when you talk about software running the system or being an integral part of it is cost. I hear people say things and like, customizing software is expensive. What is your take on that? Is that real, or is that a myth, or is there partially true? What do you think? Anybody can join in.
My sense is that if you're talking about just purely cost, you're having the wrong conversation, because it's cost is juxtaposed to the value proposition that you're delivering. Mm-hmm. If a software subscription is going to cost you $1 million, but it can save you $8 million, relatively speaking, that's not an expensive proposition. But if it's just purely price, then you're on the race to the bottom in price wars, and I don't know how I can help you there.
Right.
I think one of the things is to make sure that when you're looking at this, when you're bringing this solution to an institution and having those discussions with the stakeholders, and I think it's important to make sure that you're outlining what the hardware costs and versus the operational annual renewal licenses and things like that, and making sure that they have a good understanding of what it's going to cost them, not just on day one, but what year 2 through whatever goes on. So they are ready for that. And I think if you have those conversations, they're used to that in the IT world. They're used to doing that with their network switches and things like that. I think as long as you make sure that you're having those realistic discussions with them and expressing and communicating what those operational requirements are going to be ongoing, I think that's a little bit more easier for them to swallow. And like Frank said, making sure that you're doing a cost benefit to show them it's not just all out. You're getting benefits. There's returns on this with remote management, with ease of use, and with remote support and abilities.
I'm very curious to gut check this with you, Mark, but Utelligy has done very exhaustive research the last 4 years on the true TCO, total cost of ownership. And what we found across virtually all segments is that 70% of the cost of a traditional AV system, whether it's in a classroom or a meeting space, is from the day of handover from the original installation. That's fundamentally, that's 2/3 of the cost of that system comes between day one of handover to 5, 7, 8-year refresh in some cases. Do you guys have analysis like that substantiates that?
We're a little different in that because I wear so many hats. I'm the guy that started 13 years ago at South College, and the entire infrastructure and network is designed basically by me, and then continued through in the expansion working with our different engineers and stuff. So one thing I have learned, if you literally drive it on cost, I have to agree with you on that, Frank, you're not really going to be successful. What I have learned is that communication with all of the parties in define what is needed in the design and for new technology. And so I tried to do that a year ahead in a vision. I like to virtualize or visualize stuff. And so a year or 2 years ago, when I started redesigning our infrastructure down to the switch level and the core level, and how everything works with our 7 locations across the MPLS and all those, and then you kick into the AV side, how all that integrates together with the bandwidth. We've literally had to double our pops, bringing in VLOs in for each one of the locations, to support the video and all of the testing for the students. So once you do that and you come back with a cost, you really don't have that much a kickback or question because it's actually what's needed to make this thing work and to support the students, faculty, staff. Now, kicking off into COVID was a whole different thing because you moved everything off-site, and all of a sudden you've got a huge tunnel coming through your cloud firewall trying to get in with all the performance. So you got to jump up your, we had to jump our firewall up to a gig throughput just to get everybody in and be able to support everything. So, and the cost of that, well, who cares? Because we keep the business running and you have to make it work. There's not a choice in that matter.
Yeah.
That's fascinating, Mark. I'm wondering, was that the only thing? And did you actually have to, I'm sure every port you have open is encrypted, 443 or some other secure port,
right.
And a gig. How many students do you have logging in?
We've got around 5,000 students and about between 700 to 800 faculty and staff that have access 24/7. So it's we're in a really fast growth. We've got we're building up our online college right now and at a huge run rate, and so everything has to be secured. I literally do a security check once a week. I have a guy assigned to that. We don't open any ports unless I personally approve it, and we've tested. And we actually have everything. I can get an alert when somebody tries to do something, some engineer, and open something. I'll call him and say, you can't do this. Like I had somebody wanting to add FTP in instead of SFTP for some company that didn't say they support it. And I said, well, you need to get a new company because we're not doing that. You've got to be very secure on that piece of it.
Michael, what are some other specific unified communication video conferencing tools that perform better, other than software clients, obviously, that the network, if configured correctly, if using the right tools, just makes it better, just makes it flat out easier to do things?
You're talking like a hardware-based solution?
Anything that comes to mind, yeah.
Sure. Well, I see a lot of the streaming appliances, network streaming appliances that are out there that really allow flexibility out there in how you're deploying and cascading rooms together. I have one client who's standardized on one of the streaming platforms from one of the major groups, and it allows them to be able to tie in. Not just because their culture is a Zoom culture, but it allows them to cascade to multiple classrooms across that within that educational discipline. So they can bridge in multiple class sessions together to have a much broader student base and larger instructional reach for that one particular session. So I think those are really powerful tools right now that we're looking at that are network-based and software-driven, because you can tie those into management front ends that are not necessarily specific to a manufacturer, but now more operating system. So as I know, Frank can attest to some of these solutions out there that need to be driven off of a PC or Windows-based solution versus a Mac OS or iOS system, Chrome OS, and Android and iPhones and Linux platforms, where it allows you to be able to take all of these different technologies from the software front end and not be tethered to a particular hardware control panel.
Right.
But going back and really leveraging all of those other hardware-based solutions out there for collaboration, like the Synapse and some of the other solutions that are out there that will really, once you drop those on the network, get them configured, really allow you to be able to cross-connect with different teams and working individually on a silo, and then bringing them back together again to a shared presentation, and then ultimately dump all that content out through a live Zoom session. So if you think about how you tie all of these hardware platforms, software platforms, and web collaborations together, you can really just empower an institution with to move beyond conventional collaboration potential.
I see. One of the things I've noticed just as a layman is that when there is purpose-built hardware that's well thought out and that can be upgraded and then that is networkable, upgraded with with software and with firmware upgrades, the life of the investment goes on for a long time. If the box becomes just necessary for inputs and outputs and maybe some processing power localized or something, and it can be substantially upgraded, in other words, that's a pretty attractive, it seems like a pretty attractive methodology rather than having to buy the best box, soup du jour of the year or something. How do you find that, Mark? Since you've gone to more of that methodology of purpose-built products, I know you use Synapse a little bit, but other things too. How has that made your life easier?
One of the things, if you have a physical box, you can only upgrade it so far,
right? And
then it runs out and you have to buy a new one. So we started virtualizing everything about 3 to 4 years ago. So with Hyper-V, you can run anything. You can run Linux or whatever you need to run for the top application. And so as we're moving along that, we take out, we don't use DSPs, Extron, Crestron, all these pieces, the switchers that really, we replaced all that with the Synapse piece of that in the AV side. And so with the infrastructure that we have built, with the performance, we can connect to Atlanta. So we've got 3 PA classes right now. So we could actually teach all 3 from one location, tied together across the network, and it'd be like being in the same classroom. Right. So if something needs to be upgraded or changed, it's a software, so it's basically, a software piece that you upgrade or grow or add, and you don't have to buy another hardware piece. You need more, just like when we had everybody coming in, we found that we needed more processors and more memory on the boxes because people were coming in externally through the firewall on a VPN. So all you do is go in, in your Hyper-V and crank up from 8 to 16 process, so it's all, there's no hardware purchase. It's just ready to go, which makes it so convenient. And that's why we were able to turn everybody home in like 5 days. Literally, we just made a flip and was able to do that. So we were very successful. I'm very proud of that. There's several of the colleges here in Knoxville that still are not up and functional. They didn't make the change or weren't prepared from a software-defined ability to make that change, because if it just works on campus, then it doesn't work.
All right. Well,
it's a change in culture, Rob, and what Mark is saying is you have to sit down and look at it and get people in front of it as you're evolving, and really find the people that are going to be the champions and proponents of that, and see that success propagate through them, through the rest of the institution, and making sure you're capitalizing on that to make sure that people are really seeing the potential and not just, this is just a policy, this is how we're doing, but this is what we can do with it.
Right. I'm curious, Mark. I hate to keep picking your brain, but end users are the best.
Oh, that's good. I'm all for that.
What was your change management process like? You're an educational institution, so that's always, you've got some constituencies there that are averse to change. Yet you radically, it sounds like, in the course of a few years and maybe a couple years of planning in advance, sounds like within 5 years you were able to completely put your classroom technologies on the network, both the AV stuff, obviously the student stuff, and because you were operating in a virtualized environment, you had set yourself up for something you couldn't have even seen coming, which was this radical adjustment required for COVID. What was your change management process like, getting your constituent buy-in?
I'm almost afraid to answer that question, but I am being in IT, for 42 years, and so I was a certified PMI. I've been through everything, and so change management, in my mind, is your team working together. And sort of what was interesting, I was ready to go. I had everybody going, and we went to some of our upper management a week before and said, all right, I need to order 30 laptops. I need to do all this work. And so do you think, because we're going to be working from home, and they really didn't think we would, and didn't think we were going to need to be prepared that much. And I'm sure you've heard that before. So I literally went ahead and did it. I said, well, what's the worst they can do? They can fire me if we're not working. But a week after we had everybody working, at one of the executive meetings, the chancellor asked, basically, what are we going to do? And the VP of financial aid said, oh, Mark's already got everybody working from home. We started working from home today because, I just made the shift and nobody even noticed. That was the key thing. Everybody, if you can do that and it doesn't disrupt any of your, we didn't lose any students, any funding, any, classes. It's just, people working home. So, but I had been working on that sort of, if you look back at it, for a year and a half ago, we had a major outage where somebody in a fork truck crossed two fiber connections and took us down. So I said, I don't ever want to be in that position again, to have everything physically, so we, our Hyper-V systems are, I've got them split up between Pittsburgh and Nashville. So, it was available to be able to manage that through virtually and support everything.
From the consulting side and from the manufacturer side specifically, are you still getting pushback when it comes to designing or deploying product that is open source and on the network?
Yeah. Yes, on the design side, it's really having the conversations with the IT departments, and sometimes they're willing to try out some of these new technologies that we're trying to dump on their network. Sometimes we're forced to compartmentalize and put completely isolated network switches in there to govern it, with the capability that they can in the future link back to the main network when they feel more comfortable with it. But I think it's, when you're looking at those kind of things, it's really getting in front of the IT department and letting them gain that comfort, making sure that you're knowledgeable about it and you're bringing the resources to the team that speak their language and can translate some of the information that's coming from the manufacturers and from some of what the building program might be wanting to do. What do they want to do on an institutional level for collaboration and communication that is different from what the IT department is used to? Because they're going to have to, like I said before, they're going to have to take ownership of this and support it. So they have to feel comfortable with it. So how can we help spur on those discussions and make it easy for them? And give them the information to show that it's secure and that it's solid product, and looking at test cases, letting them pilot products out to test it out. I think it's really comes down to dialogue and time for comfort.
Right. How about you, Frank? You're feeling?
Well, the thing that comes to mind is the Gartner Lifecycle curve. And there are early adopters, and Mark sounds like an early adopter, or seasoned enough that he knows when it's safe to take a calculated risk. Mm-hmm. But he has a vision. He knew where he wanted to end up. And I suspect, as with most, director level and up IT folks, if you don't bring a credible conversation, you're not going to have a second conversation with that person.
Right.
So if you're an AV integrator and you're wanting to move to this space in a which I think you should do, or you won't be in business in 5 years, you better have some serious networking chops on your team. You better hire, CCIE level people, because the marks of the world are going to sniff that out. And as the marks of the world enable the adoption of a paradigm shift, when it starts coming over the top of the curve and all the Me Too's come along behind the marks, they're going to look to Mark to see, who's the real players here and who's not, because all the industries, they talk to each other. We know that. And if you're late to the game on the channel side, the integrator side, the VAR side, you're really put your whole company at risk. And if you're late to the game on the customer side, you may be able to say my network never went down, my data center never went down. And well, yeah, it's because you never put it through its paces and helped deliver on the promise of what networking has been about for the last 30 years. So I don't know if that kind of answers the question.
That makes sense. It begs the question, I mean, just to be blunt, if I'm an AV integrator, I don't care whether I'm a mid-size integrator, I'm a sophisticated large integrator, which I think they're trying to solve this problem internally. But what do they need? What is specifically do they need to look for to get this ball rolling instead of just dabbling? Because from my perspective, there seems to be a lot of talk, but not a lot of action in the trenches. And I mean, obviously that's all over the place, but that seems to be generally
funny. Michael was, we started Untitled 10 years ago now, 11 years ago. And Michael was one of the very first consultants we ever talked to. And we discussed this whole idea of, early adopters versus, not early adopters. And at large institutions, a mutual customer of ours, Los Angeles Community College District, and there are some, the 9 colleges in that district and 500,000 students, more than that, million. It's a huge system. And some of the directors of IT at some of the colleges were like, Mark, hey, let's do this. Let's lay the foundation. Others were not. And talk about change management. My God, and that's still going on, and they're adopting, utility across the board. But Mark and I talked about this. The biggest challenge we had, and we still see it today at that particular customer, is, it's a public institution, it's low bid, there's, standardized procurement processes. And I'd say more than half the bids that come along are really not qualified to be winning these things,
right?
Which creates a problem for Michael, it creates a problem for us, and it creates a problem for the school. The only people who feel like, yeah, we did our job are the procurement folks, but they didn't do anybody in the value chain any favors by awarding it to the wrong entities.
Right. Who's filling that void? Anybody?
Well, the Michaels of the world and us care about the end result. So, I mean, we ultimately, as a manufacturer, have to step up and get it done.
Yeah.
Okay. And the same thing on our side. If we're sitting down and having these discussions and we're talking about paradigm shifts in direction of where the institution wants to go, we need to be kind of hold to our guns and help them, guide them through this process and make sure that they feel comfortable. And we're outlining some steps to help them get there. That involves bringing the right people to the team on these discussions, including the higher up people in IT departments, media services groups, the curriculum development, making sure that you have stakeholder buy-in throughout the whole solution so this can propagate properly,
right,
and make sure it's deployed, making sure that you're outlining steps, working with the manufacturer to understand what the parameter is that is going to be put on their network, and making sure that you're helping them through that whole process to make sure that there's a comfortable deployment. It's not just the project's done, we're done. We have to go through and kind of baby this along and make sure that we're checking in with them and making sure that they are feeling comfortable with the decision that you helped provide a direction for them. And that's part of just good client relations and making sure that they are comfortable with the solution moving forward into multiple years in, and making sure that those relationships are still there with the manufacturer and the installation groups, and making sure that the institution has a complete long-term successful deployment.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds like there's just a tremendous amount of acceptance that has to happen, and gearing up and preparation. Even though we've been doing this for a long time as an industry, it just seems like time is at hand that we just have to move and do it. One more question.
I will.
Okay.
I want to throw one thing in there before we move on that.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that's interesting to hear you talk about that is that this particular implementation we're doing now, the 10 classrooms basically, is that I sat down and looked at different products and went over to UT and the Wolf Vision, and then Arthur came up and talked with us, and so we literally didn't have, there's not an AV vendor I was even willing to talk to. So, or I talked to them, and they all they know is old stuff. They put, let's put a DSP, let's put this, and then you got $5,000 worth of programming in every room, and then it breaks. Right. So I couldn't get anybody on the same page. So we're just doing it, and then we found a good company here and he said, well, why don't you buy anything from us? And I said, because I need your expertise to install it. If you learn how to do this and get authorized, with Wolf Vision and figure some of this out and move from the old school way, then we can talk about it.
Mark,
trying to find that.
That is exactly our experience. They are very direct end user conversations. We hear what you just said every day in global major financials, global major tech, global major energy, large scale and even small size, higher ed, government. And it's funny. I'm going to go off the rails here a little bit. I had owned an integration company here in the San Francisco Bay Area. We were small, gourmet, 10 million a year revenue, but we did a great job. And it occurred to me back when, this is right before Cisco acquired Dannenberg, and Dannenberg had the big MCU company, Constituent, and it was a big deal. But the people that made all the money selling Constituent and Dannenberg at the time were the ones that had the infrastructure relationship with the Mark Jones of the world, not the endpoints. And they'd let me sell hundreds of endpoints, and I couldn't figure out for the life of me why they were willing to let go of these $15,000 codecs when there was hundreds of them on a deal, because the AT&Ts of the world, it was the infrastructure. That's where the value was.
Right.
And my point is coming real quick here. The fascinating thing for me is that at the time, TMS could not do anything to tell you if the flat screen was working, if any of the peripheral equipment was working, and thereby a successful video call couldn't happen. Reciprocally, the old school AV paradigms, the big names we all know and love, couldn't do any meaningful enterprise management. And so you had to have both kind of systems in place. And that was the impetus for us starting this company, Utelligy. And
it's amazing. That is absolutely amazing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. I set out to save the AV industry, for whatever sort of like weird psychosis that had. And we've kind of, I love the people in this industry. I know so many of them. But Mark, the more I hear it every day for years now, they're like, sorry. And I'm watching my friends that have these businesses that are relegating themselves to hardcore commoditized price selling, and all the values being sucked out by the consultants, the manufacturer, and the end user, where that's where the value lies. And it's a tragedy to watch it unfold.
They're not in the virtual world yet. They haven't understood software. Virtual, they just hadn't got there.
Right.
Yeah.
It's time for some final words and some summaries if we've got any here. But it just begs the question that it's like the proverbial king has no clothes or whatever. It's so obvious in some respects, right? But we're not kind of moving wholeheartedly into it. Maybe this past 4 or 5 months will hasten all of that. But it's become obvious to me that writing on the network is very important for all kinds of good reasons. Ultimately, there's a huge value there across the board, from the manufacturer to the designer to the end user, and maybe mostly the end user. If I take away anything from this, I would say that pay more attention to that paradigm right now, and because that's what the end user wants. From everything I've seen, once a system is set up so that it can be monitored remotely and scaled easier, people are in love with that paradigm for sure. There's no doubt. Well, thank you so much, all of you, Michael Dannenberg, Frank Pellkofer, and Mark Jones. Really a good discussion coming from the three sides of our industry. I think there was a lot said there, so I thank you very much.